The marble foyer of a $43 million home in Westmount should not sound hollow under a contractor's boot. But it did. Seth Calloway crouched down on one knee, pressed two fingers against the pale stone floor, and knocked. The sound that came back was wrong. Slightly too light, slightly too empty, like something underneath had quietly given way. He knocked again, 3 inches to the left. Solid. He moved right. Hollow again. He traced the shape of it with his knuckles, a rough rectangle maybe 4 feet wide, running toward the base of the grand staircase. Behind him he heard a soft mechanical hum. "You're the contractor." It wasn't a question. He turned. The woman in the doorway of the adjoining study had dark hair pulled back with the kind of effortless precision that takes 20 minutes to achieve. She was perhaps 38, 40 at most, dressed in a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, a wool throw across her lap. The wheelchair she sat in was a sleek, motorized model, matte black frame, joystick on the right armrest, and she navigated it through the doorway with the ease of someone who had long since stopped thinking about it. She was looking at him the way people in $43 million homes usually looked at contractors, politely, distantly, like he was a piece of furniture she was deciding whether to keep. "Seth Calloway," he said, standing. "Calloway Restoration. Your property manager contacted us last week about the floor tiles in the east wing." He paused. "I found something else." She didn't flinch. She looked at the floor where his hand had been, then back at him. "What kind of something?" "Subfloor settlement. Looks like it runs from here to the base of the staircase. Whoever laid this stone didn't account for the load shift after the renovation. The support underneath has been separating slowly. Could be months before you'd see it from above, but the sound doesn't lie." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she moved her chair forward until she was beside him, positioned her hand over the same spot, and knocked herself. The hollow sound answered her the same way it had answered him. "My cousin hired the firm that did this renovation," she said quietly. It wasn't directed at him. It was the kind of thing you say when you are filing something away. Seth said nothing. It wasn't his place. From somewhere down the hall there was a crash, the clatter of something plastic hitting hardwood, and then a small voice said, with absolute conviction, "I didn't do it." The woman looked up. Seth exhaled through his nose. "That's my son," he said. "He's 7. He was supposed to wait in the truck." "How long has he been in the house?" Based on the guilt in his voice, "Probably 4 minutes." The corners of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "How much damage can a 7-year-old do in 4 minutes?" "You'd be surprised," Seth said, already moving toward the sound. "Finn," he called. "Whatever it was, pick it up and bring it to me." There was a pause. Then the sound of small feet on hardwood. Finn Calloway appeared around the corner of the hall holding a ceramic owl approximately the size of his head. It was miraculously intact. He presented it to his father with the careful solemnity of someone who understood that his continued freedom depended on this moment going well. "It fell," Finn said. "It fell because you touched it. It was already falling when I touched it." Seth looked at the woman. She was watching Finn with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not the strained tolerance he usually saw on the faces of people unaccustomed to children, but something quieter than that. Something a little like recognition. "What's your name?" she asked Finn. He looked at her, then at her wheelchair, with the straightforward curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned that noticing things was impolite. "Finn," he said. "What's wrong with your legs?" "Finn. It's all right." She looked at the boy. "I was in an accident a few years ago. My legs don't work the way they used to." Finn considered this seriously. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore." "Okay," he said, and then held out the ceramic owl. "I think this is yours." She took it. "Thank you, Finn." She set it carefully on the hall table beside her. "I'm Katherine. You can call me that. Katherine Aldridge." Seth had looked her up before the job, out of habit, not because he was particularly impressed by wealth, but because it helped to know who you were working for. CEO of Aldridge Capital, one of the largest private equity firms in Quebec. Built the company from a mid-tier consulting firm her father had left her at 31 into something that now managed assets across 4 provinces. She'd been in the wheelchair for 3 years, the result of a car accident on the highway outside Montreal. The details in the press had been vague, the way details about powerful people's misfortunes tend to be vague. None of that was why he was here. He was here because her marble floor was failing, and he was good at fixing things that failed. "I'll need to pull one tile to confirm the extent of it," he told her, when Finn had been relocated to a chair in the front hall with a juice box from Seth's bag and the unambiguous instruction not to move. "If the settlement is what I think it is, we're looking at a full relay from the staircase to the east corridor. 3 weeks, maybe 4. The east corridor includes my home office. I can sequence the work so you have access in the mornings." She was quiet, the way people get quiet when they're calculating. The firm that did the original renovation, they signed off on all the structural work. They certified it. "Then their certification is wrong," Seth said. He said it without heat. It was simply the truth, and there wasn't much point in dressing it up. "I can show you the load calculations if you want to go over them." She looked at him for a long moment. It was the kind of look he'd gotten before, from people who expected a contractor to be defensive when questioned, who were waiting for him to deflect or minimize. He just waited. "All right," she said. "Show me." He spread the measurements across the kitchen island, the load charts, the acoustic map he'd made with his knuckles, a sketch he'd drawn on his notepad of where the hollow sections ran. She studied them without asking him to explain. She had the particular quality of someone accustomed to reading technical documents and finding the thing that mattered. "Here," she said, pointing to the sketch. "This section runs directly under the elevator shaft." He nodded. He'd noticed that too. "The elevator was part of the same renovation," she said. "Then I'd want to look at the shaft before we start anything else." There was a knock at the front door. Katherine's expression shifted. Something closed in it the way a window shuts before rain. "That will be my cousin," she said. "He stops by on Thursdays." The man who entered was perhaps 45, in a suit that cost more than Seth's truck, wearing the particular expression of someone who considers himself the smartest person in most rooms. He stopped when he saw Seth. "Who's this?" "The contractor," Katherine said. "He's found a problem with the flooring." The cousin, she hadn't given his name, looked at Seth the way certain men look at tradespeople, a glance that lasted exactly long enough to confirm that the person was not worth further attention. "The flooring firm already signed off on everything, Kate. I'm sure whatever he's found is minor." "The subfloor is separating," Seth said. He kept his voice entirely neutral. "It runs under the east corridor and possibly the elevator shaft. It's not minor." The cousin's jaw tightened. "That firm has an excellent reputation. Then they'll want to know their work has a problem." A silence settled in the kitchen. Finn, from his chair in the front hall, called out, "Dad, can I have another juice box?" "No." "Why?" "Because you already had one and we're working." "You're working." "I'm just sitting here." The cousin stared in the direction of the hall with open disbelief. Katherine's almost smile returned, very briefly, before she composed herself. "I'd like you to check the elevator shaft," she said to Seth. "Today, if possible. I'll need the mechanical specs. I can have them sent from the property manager within the hour." The cousin stepped forward. "Katherine, I really don't think." "Thank you, Gordon." Her voice was pleasant and absolute. "I'll call you this evening." Gordon Ashcroft. Seth put the name together later from the directory on Aldridge Capital's website. Left the way men like him always leave when they've been dismissed by someone they underestimated. Stiffly, with the careful dignity of someone who intends to make this a problem later. The mechanical specs arrived in 40 minutes. Seth spent the better part of the afternoon on his back in the elevator shaft, which was a 2-stop residential lift running from the ground floor to Katherine's bedroom suite on the second. What he found, he almost didn't believe. The hydraulic cylinder seal had been installed incorrectly, not through incompetence, but through a very specific, very deliberate choice. The kind of choice that would pass casual inspection. The kind of choice that would only fail under sustained use. The kind of failure that when it happened would happen suddenly and in the worst possible place, between floors. He came out of the shaft, wiped his hands on a cloth, and found Katherine in the study where he'd first seen her, on a video call that she ended when she saw his face. "Tell me," she said. he told her. She was very still while he talked. The late afternoon light came through the tall windows and lay across the floor, and she sat in it without moving, her hands folded in her lap, listening to every word. When he finished, she said, "Someone engineered this?" "Yes, not carelessness. Not a mistake. No." She looked past him, out the window, at something he couldn't see. He waited. Finn had fallen asleep in the hall chair with his jacket as a pillow, which Seth had discovered 10 minutes ago and decided to leave undisturbed. "My cousin arranged the original contracts," Katherine said. "He selected every firm. He approved every sign-off. I know." She looked at him. "How long have you known? Since you mentioned the elevator shaft this morning. Why didn't you say something then?" "Because knowing something and being able to prove it are two different things," Seth said. "Now we can prove it." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the March light was fading toward gray. "I need to call someone," she said. "Not the police, not yet." She paused. "Do you know what Gordon's been doing for the past 8 months?" Seth shook his head. "He's been positioning himself for a proxy vote. A vote that, if it succeeds, would remove me as CEO and install him as interim director. He's been telling the board I'm not capable of running the company, that the accident left me." She paused over the word, impaired. "Cognitively." She said it flatly, without effect, the way you say something you've had to repeat enough times that the sting of it has been replaced by exhaustion. "He's convinced 3 board members. He needs 1 more. Who's the 4th? "A man named Roland Whitmore. He's been on the fence. Gordon had dinner with him last Tuesday." Seth absorbed this. "Does Whitmore know about the renovations?" "No. None of the board does." "Then he needs to." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're suggesting I bring this to the board directly. I'm suggesting that a hydraulic cylinder seal doesn't lie. And a board member sitting at the fence might respond differently to evidence than to Gordon's dinners." He met her eyes. "That's your call, not mine. I just fix floors." The almost smile again, more real this time. "You don't just fix floors. I also fix elevator shafts." She was quiet. Then she said, "Seth, why are you still here? Your workday ended 2 hours ago." He glanced toward the hall, toward his sleeping son. "Finn was asleep. I didn't want to wake him." Katherine looked at the doorway for a moment. Something moved across her face. Not pity, which Seth had learned to identify on sight, but something softer than that. Something more private. "Stay for dinner," she said. "There's food. And I'd like to go over the documentation with you before tomorrow. I have an early start. So do I." He stayed. The board meeting was called for the following Thursday. Katherine had spent the week preparing with the specific, focused energy of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. She'd retained a forensic engineering firm, not Gordon's firm, not anyone Gordon knew, and the report they produced in 4 days was 60 pages long and unambiguous in its conclusions. The hydraulic seal failure was not accidental. The subfloor separation had been accelerated by a secondary compound applied to the bonding agent during installation. A compound that left traces if you knew where to look. Gordon arrived at the meeting 12 minutes late, which was his way of signaling that he considered the whole thing a formality. He sat down at the far end of the boardroom table, beside Roland Whitmore, and he smiled at Katherine with the particular warmth of a man who believed he had already won. Katherine set the engineering report on the table. She set Seth's structural documentation beside it. She set the signed contracts in Gordon's handwriting, authorizing each of the firms involved in a neat row on top. She said, "I'd like to begin." Gordon's smile lasted approximately 4 more seconds. Then he looked at the documents and the smile was gone. What followed was not dramatic, in the way dramatic things are dramatic in films. No one shouted. No one wept. Gordon's lawyer, who had been called and arrived by the time Katherine was 20 minutes into her presentation, said very little after the first 10 minutes, because there was very little to say. Roland Whitmore asked 3 questions, each one more careful than the last. The other board members were quiet. Katherine answered every question without consulting notes. At the end of the meeting, Gordon Ashcroft left the building with his lawyer and did not return. The RCMP became involved the following week. The investigation widened quickly. It turned out the elevator shaft was not the only modification Gordon had arranged. There was a question of financial irregularities in two subsidiary accounts, and a question about whether a certain accident on a highway outside Montreal 3 years earlier had been entirely accidental. That last question was not answered quickly. It took months, but it began to be asked. Katherine called Seth on a Friday afternoon, 6 weeks after the board meeting. He was at a job site in Pointe Claire, repointing the stone foundation of a Victorian semi-detached, and he almost didn't hear his phone over the sound of the mixer. "I have a proposal," she said when he answered. "I'm listening. Aldridge Capital has a portfolio company that manufactures mobility equipment. Wheelchairs, primarily, including motorized models. The engineering on most of the line hasn't been updated significantly in 7 years. I've been looking for someone to lead a full structural and design review." A pause. Someone with an eye for what actually fails, and why. Seth set down his trowel. "I'm a restoration contractor. You identified a deliberately concealed hydraulic failure in 2 hours. You mapped subfloor settlement by sound. You read load calculations without being asked." Another pause. "I've had structural engineers with graduate degrees miss things you found in an afternoon." He was quiet. "It would be a consulting arrangement to start," she said. "You'd set your own schedule. Keep the contracting business if you want to. I'm not asking you to give anything up. I'm asking if you'd be willing to look at what we're building and tell me what's wrong with it. And if I find things that are wrong, then we fix them." He looked at the stone foundation in front of him. 120 years of settling, shifting, slowly giving way, and still standing. He thought about Finn, who had started asking questions this week about why some wheelchairs went by themselves and some ones needed pushing, and whether the ones that went by themselves were smarter. "I'll need to see the production specs first," Seth said. "I'll have them sent Monday." He could hear something in her voice that was not quite relief and not quite satisfaction, but occupied the same space as both. "Katherine," he said. "Yes," the owl Finn knocked over. "Was it valuable?" A pause. "It was my grandmother's. I'm sorry." "He brought it to me," she said. That mattered more. The March light, it was April now, almost May, came through the bare branches of the trees along the street and lay itself across the stone. Seth picked up his trowel. There was a lot of work still left to do. There always was. But for the first time in a long while, he was thinking about more than just the job in front of him.